In this video, we will take a look at the menus. And first, we will see the pause menu, and we will also open our main blueprint and take a look at the pause menu section. Have a dedicated input for the pause, and first we check if the game is already paused or not. So if it's not, we go to the pause menu event, set game paused, we add to viewport the widget. So on event begin play, which is here, one of the things that we do, we create the pause menu widget, and we also add it to viewport and immediately remove it. This is needed so that the settings that were saved would load. The menu's logic is set this way that when it is created on event begin play, it loads the settings. So if we don't add it to viewport on event begin play for the character, then the settings that were saved will only be applied when we first create the pause menu. But we will see this again. So we add it to viewport. We set input mode game and UI. We need both because we want to have the possibility to unpause the game with the same input. If we set the input to UI only, then we will not be able to use our input action. And we show our mouse cursor. If the game is already paused, we go to unpause event. We set the game unpaused, remove from parent the widget, and we set input to game only, and we hide the cursor. So we go to pause menu. We can see quite a lot of stuff here, and here we can see we have pause menu and options menu sections. We will hide the options menu for now, and we will select our zoom button, and we can see what it does by clicking here. Now this is the graph. This is the designer section. So getting back to the graph, here we have all the buttons of the pause menu. So on clicked, we cast to first person character, and we go to unpause event. When we click on the options button, we set the visibility to this whole thing, which is the pause menu. By the way, to have the ability to change parameters, the elements in the designer section must be set is variable. So we set the visibility to hidden, and we set the visibility to visible for our options menu. Exit to main menu. We open a level called ClassicShooter main menu, and we set input mode to UI only, and we show the mouse cursor. We will take a look at the main menu later. When we go to the main menu level, in the level blueprint, there is some logic that adds the widget to viewport for the main menu. Quit button quits the game. Quite simple. So getting back to the designers, we've we've gone through all of the buttons, and we can hide this now, and we unhide options menu. First, game options. So this is the second column. Game options. We set the visibility of graphics panel and sounds panel to hidden and options panel to visible. So let's see that. The options menu, we have game options, graphics, and sounds. So whenever we hit the game button, we hide these two. We make this one visible. Oh, back to the graph, and same happens for the rest of the buttons. So when we click graphics, we hide the other two menus. Same for the sound, we make this one visible and two others invisible. They are here, so we will be dealing now with the game options panel, so we can hide the graphics and the sounds. As you can see, this is what we have. Also two other buttons, back to pause menu and back to main menu. Now back to main menu simply removes from parent the whole widget, and back to, this should be called pause menu. Back to pause menu, we set the visibility for pause menu visible and the options menu hidden. So this back to main menu by default is hidden, and it only becomes visible when this thing is called from the main menu, and we will see this also in the main menu. So the game options. First of all, let's see that in our folder we have 3 blueprints for saving our options, and we have game options, graphics, and sound options. If we open up our game options, we can see a list of variables here. Now all of the game options go through our main blueprint of our main character. So all of these variables can be found in our main blueprint. So let's take also a quick look at our in the UI. We have UI crosshair. If we open it up, it's very simple. We have simply this in the middle of the screen with the centered pivot. We have this image. We can see it's binding, and we cast to first person character, and based on the variable called crosshair style, simple integer, based on its value, we use different images. So if it's 0, it's image called crosshair 0. If it's 1, it's and so on. So these images can be found here in the crosshair. They're there. So this is defined. Again, we can open our main blueprint. We can have all of these, we can see all of these options here. We have crosshair color, size, mouse sensitivity, crosshair UI. So back to our yes, this one, the blueprint for the save games, for the saving the options. We have all of these variables, also field of view and automatic switch weapons and reload and stuff. So in the UI, so in the pause menu, what we do, here on clicked and these two buttons, on clicked we cast the first person character and we set the crosshair style to -1 and here to +1, obviously left and right. We clamp the value to from 0 to 9, and then we do the same thing in our file for saving the options. So this is a variable that is set on event construct. Here on event construct, we first of all we push sound mix modifiers so that the sound effects will start working, and we also create, well, we're looking at the game options, so here we create save game object and make it a variable called game options. So on event begin play, we create the save game object and set it as variable. So this, now we can address our save game object through this variable, which is used here. And here we are setting inside of our blueprint for saving the options, saving the game options, we're setting the same variables there. And we create save game slot with a name called game options. So to recap, our save game object is being created on event construct, same as event begin play basically. And when we change the value for the crosshair inside of our main blueprint, we do the same thing in our blueprint for saving the settings. And then again on our event construct, we check if the save game exists, and if it does, we load the game from slot, which has the same name here. We cast to BP game options, which is this, right? And we need to set the variable again. And then in our first person character blueprint, we set all of those values that were saved, which is crosshair style, size, color, and so on. We will go through this again once more. It's a little bit confusing probably. So for the crosshair style, we are changing the crosshair style variable in our first person character blueprint. We are also doing the same in our save game file, in our save options file settings. Crosshair size, we have a slider here, and we can see the text. There is a binding for the text. We can see the binding. It's a function, so it's not in the event graph. It's a function. The functions are all here, quite a list. We cast the first person character, get the crosshair size variable and get its as a text, get its value as a text here. And the slider also has a binding what to display from the beginning, right? Also, we cast to first person character, get the size, and this is the minimum value, and this plus this is the maximum value. Now I'll try to explain it here. So when we here also we have not only the binding, of course, but only on value changed. So it's this part, right? The values for the slider by default is 0 and 1. So we need to kind of adjust those values to what we need. So to get it so that 0 would be 0.5 and 1 would be 3, we have this expression. First we snap to grid and we have the minimum grid size of 0.1. And then we cast the first person character. Target is crosshair UI. We set the variable crosshair size to the value from the slider that is multiplied by 2.5 plus 0.5. So if we get 0, for example, then we will have multiplied 2.5, we get 0, plus 0.5, we have 0.5. So this is our minimum. If we have 1 coming, then we have 2.5 plus 0.5, and we have 3, and this becomes our maximum. So when we here, when we get the value to display here, which is this binding, we are doing this in reverse. We are subtracting and dividing. Back to event graph. So from this variable we make vector 2D, and this becomes the scale for the crosshair UI. So in the first person character we have crosshair UI that is also being added on event begin play. We set it to be a variable here, then can be adjusted, and we do the same thing here on event begin play, as you can see, regardless of the options. So I have all of this set up in the first person character blueprint, so that whether you have the menus or not, you still get the crosshair, you still get mouse sensitivity, you have all the options here for so that if you get rid of the menus, you know, most of the functionality will still be here. We don't have, of course, the graphic options and sound options in the main blueprint, but we have things like crosshair here, of course. So in our pause menu and options, we go to our first person character blueprint all the time. Okay. And same thing here after we have set the crosshair size in our main blueprint. We also do the same in our game options blueprint to save our settings. Crosshair color. Again, we have here a variable which is a linear color. If we go back to the crosshair UI, yes, UI crosshair, we also, yes, have color and opacity binding. First person character, get the color, and this becomes the color. So this variable here is in the first person character, and in the this is just our save game. We don't need it opened. So in our pause menu, we again, first of all, we snap the value. These are sliders, right? And we snap to grid and set the value. This is the slider red, right? It can be found here. Slider green, slider blue. So just to clarify, it's this slider set to be a variable and named slider green. This way we can get here, it's the variable, we can drag it here, and we can set its value, and we set its value based on the value that we get from sliding it, snap it to the grid so that we have we don't have too many variations in between. We cast the first person character. After that, and we set the crosshair color variable, that is a linear color, from this, based on these variables. So here we're changing those variables. And here we get the value of those variables. And we make a linear color and set it in the to be the crosshair color. So we set this variable in our first person character, right? And this is used by our crosshair UI here in the binding for the color and opacity of this image. And we do the same thing. We set we set the same variable in our game option blueprint, which is saving the settings, and save game to slot. Mouse sensitivity, snap to grid, set value. Again, to clarify, this is not an additional variable, and here also it's the slider itself. So when its value is changed, we are setting its value again, snapped to a certain grid size. We cast the first person character, and we have a multiplier here, and we set the mouse sensitivity inside of our first person character blueprint, and we set the same thing in our game options blueprint. Again, this is the variable, right, that was set here, and it goes C to BP game options. From the BP game options, of course. Field of view, again a slider. Oh, and also of course, for the mouse sensitivity we have the binding for the value, so it gets the mouse sensitivity from our first person character blueprint, divides it by 5, and gives us the value. And the same here, only it gives us the value directly. Don't have to divide it. For the field of view, in the event graph, same thing, we are snapping to grid, we are casting to first person character, and we also have maximum and minimum. So the minimum is 20 and maximum is 120, right? So if the value is 0, this will be 0, and we plus 20, we get 20. If we get 1, then this is 100 plus 20, we get 120. And everything in between is correctly calculated this way. We set the field of view variable. Actually, we set the field of view for the camera component. There's no variable like this in our first-person character blueprint. It's directly the field of view parameter of the camera for the first person, and we simply change that. However, we do have this variable in our save game file. So we set the variable called field of view to this value. Auto switch weapons. Well, you can imagine at this point that it's quite obvious. If it's checked, then we set auto switch weapons to 1, and we pass this value and set it in the save game slot. And if it's not checked, then we set it to 0 in our first-person character blueprint, and then we do the same thing in the save game slot. Same for automatic reload and bazooka exclusion. I know that the whole thing about saving and loading probably is a little bit confusing, so I will be trying to explain this probably over and over again, because it also took me quite a while to figure out how this works. So again, we have PP game options, PP graphic options, and PP sound options. These blueprints are there simply to store the values for the variables. I will actually rename them to save game options I will actually name them saved, because they don't save anything, right? So we have saved game options here. If we open it up, there's nothing inside except for the variables that we need. And we save inside, so based on this blueprint, right? On event begin play, a save game object is created. And the variable that we have inside of our menu gets the values, kind of gets the list of those variables. And whenever we do something with our settings, not only we execute the commands, like not only we change the values in our first person character blueprint, but we also do the same thing inside the created game object. And we address it through this variable here, here, and so on. And then when the widget constructs, when it appears, and this is why, as I said previously, we add it to viewport and then remove it immediately on event begin play for our first person character, so that this happens when the game starts right away. Because if we don't have this, then the options will be loaded once you enter the pause menu for the first time. So when this gets constructed, we also load all of those values, and not only will load them, we also need to set the variable. This is the thing that I was missing for quite a while and couldn't understand why nothing is working. That you also need to set the variable, because you loaded the game from the slot, all of those variables, and we also need to pass them to our variable inside of our pause menu. Here it is, graphic options. And then we need to pass the loaded values and to our main character blueprint. So we set crosshair style, size, color, sensitivity, field of view, and so on. So let's move on. Next is our graphics. So we can make this panel invisible, and we set graphics panel visible. Current resolution. We have a binding. Very simple actually. Get viewport size, break vector, and get the X here, and then here we're getting the Y. So this displays our resolution. This here is binded. Okay. Okay, where do we start? From here. Let's close all the functions, so that we only have our event graph, the aspect ratio. Okay. Here we have this variable that has 3 different entries inside. 0 means 0 has 4 to 3, 1, 16, 9, 2, 16, 10. And we have an index for that. Just a variable. So here, when we click on this button, right? On-clicked button AR next. We get the index variable and add 1 to it. And we get the value from this variable that has these entries. We get its length, and its length is 3, but we need it from 0, right? So we need to subtract 1. And this way we get one of these entries to be displayed. So we set our aspect ratio index variable this way. We add 1 to it, and we clamp it, and the maximum value is the length of this variable minus 1. And then, as before, we pass this value to our save game. Obviously, same going backwards, only we subtract one. So when we press this button, we are changing the aspect ratio index, this variable, and the maximum value for it is defined by the length of this thing. So what it means is that if you want to have more aspect ratios, you add an entry here, and it will work because this is taken into account. If it will become longer, this logic will take care of it. You will not have to adjust anything more. You simply add another entry here, and everything will be fine. The maximum value and the minimum value will always be correct. So, based on this variable that we have here, this text is being displayed. We can take a look, and this text is displayed based on this variable and this index. So if this index is 0, it will show us 4 to 3. If it's 1, it will show us 16 to 9. If it's 2, it will show us, well, obviously the last one. And also, based on that, we have the visibility for one of those 3 cascade menus. By default, you can see the visibility. It is well, it has a binding, so it's not really visible. It's what this will say it to be. So if we open it here and we get our aspect ratios from this file based on the aspect ratio index. So if the index that we were setting is 1, we get 16 to 9. And if this is true, you see, then we set it to visible. If not, it is collapsed. So this one is checking if the index is pointing out in this variable to an entry that is equal to this. Now if this is true, it is visible. If not, it is collapsed. And this way we get one of those displayed. And then one of those gives us, we can see around it here, the possibility to execute the commands. So when one of the options, first of all, we have this variable here that says, okay, I'm not using it yet. Yes, so it is done in a very simplistic way here. If the selected item is here, we can see the entries. It's not a binding, they were entered manually in each of them. And if we select the one that is equal to this, then we execute console command. And here you can see the command. And we set the resolution. It goes the same for all of them. It's quite simple. Here we have the rest of the options: resolution scale, post-processing, anti-aliasing, shadow, frame rate, so on. Now it uses kind of the same approach as the aspect ratio was using. So we have this variable, which is RS settings. We have, as you can see, those possible display texts. And based on the index here, you can see the binding. Based on the index, it will display one of those entries. So going back to close the functions, go to so based on that index, and that index has been changed when we click these buttons. This one subtracts, this one adds, and we clamp the value to the length of these settings -1. Same here. And we pass these values to the save game slot. If we open our saved graphics options, we have this number of variables. Same happens for all of those. We have only we have also here like here we had resolution scale settings dedicated, but other got simply main settings. Main settings meaning low, medium, high, epic. So this can be used for post-processing, anti-aliasing, shadow quality, but not the frame rate. The frame rate got its own 15, 30, 60, 144 Hertz. And we have corresponding commands. For example, frame per second commands got these entries. So we first set the index value when we click those buttons, right? We change the index, and this index will also indicate what command to execute from this variable. So to recap once more, I don't know, the shadows quality, for example, when we click the button, we change the index, we save the index to the slot, to the game slot, and based also on this index, we get the appropriate command from the list and execute it.